The great halls of the Zorian Empire were filled with glittering lights, towering pillars, and endless rows of alien nobles dressed in fine robes. Their voices echoed across the chamber, a mix of laughter, sharp whispers, and mocking tones. They had gathered for what they called a wedding, though everyone knew it was nothing more than a spectacle. The nobles had planned it as entertainment, a cruel joke to amuse themselves. Instead of selecting a noble bride from one of the high houses, they had chosen a human woman from Earth. To them, humans were weak, backward, and unworthy of standing among the stars. By bringing a human into their noble court, they believed they were showing the galaxy just how far above humanity they stood. The chosen bride was Anara, a young woman with calm eyes and simple grace. She walked through the halls with quiet steps, wearing a plain white gown given to her by the Empire. It was not made with care or honor, but it still flowed around her like soft river water. Her black hair was tied loosely, and though she carried no jewels, her natural beauty made many turn their heads without meaning to. The alien prince waiting at the center of the hall was Roland, son of a great noble house. He was tall, with a silver crest running across his head, his deep eyes glowing faint blue. His people were feared across the galaxy for their strength, their fleets, and their long rule. Roland himself had never questioned his place until this day. He stood before the court, wearing ceremonial armor that gleamed under the light, but there was no pride in his eyes. The nobles around him laughed as Anara walked closer. Some whispered that she looked like a lost servant. Others chuckled, saying this was the perfect display of how low humans had fallen. The hall was filled with the sound of cruel delight, as if the event was nothing but a stage play. Yet Anara did not lower her head. She walked slowly, her back straight, her gaze steady. Each step seemed to silence a few voices, though many still laughed. Her calmness unsettled them. She did not act broken, nor did she try to please. She simply walked as if she belonged there. When she reached Roland, the laughter grew louder. The elder noble who led the ceremony raised his long staff and declared, before the eyes of the Empire, the prince shall take this human as his bride. Let the galaxy witness how far we stand above the rest. His words carried mockery, not blessing. Roland looked down at Anara, expecting to see fear. Instead, he saw her quiet strength. Her eyes were not begging, nor were they angry. They were calm, as if she already understood more than anyone else in the room. For the first time in his life, Roland felt unsure. He reached out his hand, and Anara placed her hand in his. The crowd roared with laughter, mocking the sight. But as their hands touched, a strange silence filled the prince's mind. Her hand was small, warm, and steady, as if grounding him. For a brief moment, he forgot the hall, the nobles, the lights. The elder noble continued, his voice mocking. The union is made. The joke is complete. Let us laugh and remember this day. The crowd cheered, clapping and mocking both Anara and Roland. Yet Anara did not waver. She turned her face toward the hall, meeting the eyes of those who laughed. She did not shout or argue. She only stood with dignity, her hand still holding Roland's. Her silence spoke louder than any words. It was as if she was saying, without voice, that their cruelty could not touch her spirit. Some nobles grew uncomfortable under her gaze. Their laughter softened, though many still smirked. But something had shifted. After the ceremony, the nobles feasted and celebrated their own joke. Anara sat quietly at Roland's side, listening to their words, watching their gestures. She did not eat much, nor did she try to join in. She observed. She noticed how their pride made them blind, how their arrogance turned even a wedding into a weapon of mockery. Roland remained silent through most of the feast. He kept glancing at Anara, wondering why she did not break under the weight of humiliation. Other humans he had seen in the Empire often bent quickly, trying to survive. But this one was different. Her calm strength unsettled him more than the laughter of the nobles. When the feast ended, the nobles returned to their chambers, still laughing at their own cruelty. The hall grew quiet, and the lights dimmed. Roland led Anara to her chamber, as tradition required, though he did not know what words to speak. As they walked through the corridors, Roland finally asked, "Why do you not bow your head? Do you not feel their mockery?" Anara looked at him, her eyes calm as always. "They can laugh as they wish. Their laughter does not change who I am." Roland stopped walking. Her words were simple, yet they struck him deeper than any blade. In his world, strength was shown through power and fear. Yet here was a human, standing with no power, no army, no wealth, and still she did not bend. That night, as Roland left her chamber, his mind was restless. The nobles had called it a joke, but to him it no longer felt like one. He could not forget the look in her eyes, the quiet strength in her voice. Something had begun that none of them expected. The palace of the Zorian Empire was never silent. Even at night, its great towers glowed with soft blue light, and the sound of distant voices carried through endless corridors. Servants walked quietly, guards stood tall in polished armor, and nobles lingered in their chambers, speaking of politics and power. Yet for Roland, son of House Zorian, the world felt strangely still. He had never been shaken before. He had stood in battles, he had faced the council of elders, he had endured challenges without hesitation. But that evening, the calm strength of Anara, the human bride mocked before the empire, had unsettled him more than war. Her words echoed in his thoughts, "They can laugh as they wish. Their laughter does not change who I am." Long after the feast, Roland wandered the stone corridors, unable to rest. His steps carried him toward the outer gardens, where tall silver trees stretched toward the night sky. Stars hung above, sharp and clear, as if the heavens themselves were listening. He stood there, staring upward, trying to understand the strange pull he felt. Then he saw her. Anara sat quietly at the edge of the garden, her white gown brushing against the grass, her black hair loose around her shoulders. She had slipped away from her chamber without notice, seeking silence under the open stars. She did not look surprised when she saw Roland. Instead, she gave a small nod, as if she had expected him to come. "You should be resting," Roland said, his voice low. "I rest better under the sky," Anara answered softly. "It reminds me of home." Roland stepped closer. "Earth?" She nodded. "Yes. The sky there is not as bright as here, but it holds the same stars. When I look up, I know I am not lost." For a long moment, neither spoke. The garden was quiet except for the sound of leaves moving gently in the night breeze. Roland sat across from her, his armored form heavy against the soft grass. He studied her face, searching for weakness, but found only peace. "You are not like the others I have seen," he said at last. "Most humans here bend quickly. They try to survive by pleasing those in power. But you did not bend, even when the court mocked you." Anara looked at him with calm eyes. "If I bend, then I lose myself. I would rather stand and be laughed at than bow and be empty." Her words cut through him. He had lived his whole life under rules of power. To be strong was to control, to command, to show no weakness. Yet here was someone with no army, no title, and she spoke with more strength than most warriors. They sat in silence again, but it was not heavy. It was the kind of silence that carried meaning, as if the air itself was listening. Roland leaned back, his gaze lifting to the stars. "Do you hate me for being part of their joke?" Anara shook her head. "You did not laugh." Her answer was simple, yet it struck deep. He had not laughed, though he could have. He had not joined the others, though it would have been easy. Something inside him had held back, and she had noticed. "Why do you trust me?" he asked. "I do not trust you yet," she replied, her voice soft but clear. "But I see something in your eyes." You are not at peace with their cruelty. That is enough for me to speak with you tonight. The night deepened, and their words flowed slowly, like a river finding its path. Roland asked about Earth, and Anara spoke of green fields, wide oceans, and stories told around firelight. She told him about the way humans survived storms, hunger, and wars, always finding a way to rise again. In return, Roland spoke of his world, the weight of noble duty, the endless pressure of tradition, and the pride of his people. He told her that strength was the law of the empire, and weakness was crushed without mercy. Yet as he spoke, he felt those laws grow heavy in his mouth, as if they no longer belonged to him. Hours passed unnoticed. The stars shifted across the sky, and the silver trees shimmered with the cool light of the moons. At one point, Anara asked, "Do you ever wonder what the stars hide?" Roland frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "Look at them," she said, pointing upward. "There are countless stars. Each may have worlds we have never seen, people we have never known. Yet your empire believes it already owns the future. Do you not think the stars laugh at such pride?" Her words made him silent. He had never thought of the stars that way. To him, they had always been battlefields waiting to be conquered. But when she spoke, he saw them differently, mysteries, not prizes. The night grew colder, and Roland noticed Anara shiver slightly. Without thinking, he removed the long cloak from his shoulders and placed it around her. She looked at him, her calm eyes softening for the first time. "Thank you," she said simply. He nodded, but his chest tightened. He was not supposed to feel this. She was human, chosen as a joke, meant to be forgotten after the laughter faded. Yet in this quiet garden, under the endless stars, he felt closer to her than to any noble of his own people. Finally, when the first light of dawn touched the horizon, Anara rose to return to her chamber. She looked at Roland one last time. "This night was not a joke," she said. Roland stood slowly, his eyes meeting hers. "No. It was not." She walked back into the palace, her white gown trailing softly against the stone floor. Roland remained in the garden, watching the sky. His heart was restless, his thoughts alive with questions he had never asked before. The nobles would never understand. The empire would never allow it. Yet Roland knew one truth he could not escape. The weeks after the strange night in the garden passed quietly on the surface, but under that silence something was changing. Roland went about his duties as a noble, attending councils, overseeing military training, and carrying the weight of his house. Yet each day, his thoughts returned to Anara. He often caught himself wondering what she was doing in the palace halls, or if she was once again sitting beneath the stars at night. He had spoken with many nobles in his life, but none of their words lingered in his mind the way hers did. She had spoken with no power, no pride, no plan to gain control, yet her voice carried more strength than any command he had ever given. Anara, meanwhile, lived quietly in the chambers given to her. The nobles expected her to be ashamed, to hide her face, to bend under their laughter. Yet she did none of those things. She walked calmly through the corridors, ate her meals without complaint, and spoke politely when spoken to. She was neither loud nor silent. She was simply herself, and that unsettled those who tried to make her feel small. Servants whispered among themselves that the human bride did not break. Guards noticed that she met their eyes instead of lowering her gaze. Slowly, word began to spread through the palace. What was meant to be a joke had become something different. Then came the first whisper that shook the court. One morning, Anara collapsed while walking in the inner garden. A healer was called at once. He examined her carefully, using the tools of the empire. When he finished, his face was pale, and his hands shook slightly. "She carries life," he announced in disbelief. "The human carries the child of Prince Roland." The words spread like fire. Within hours, the palace buzzed with voices, and by nightfall the entire court knew. Some laughed again, calling it impossible. Others shouted that it was dangerous. A few whispered that it was a sign of change. At the council chamber, the nobles gathered in anger. "This is a disgrace," one elder said, his voice sharp. "A human should never bear the blood of our houses." "It cannot be allowed," another declared. "This child will bring shame upon the empire. We must remove it before word reaches beyond the palace walls." But there were some who did not laugh or shout. A few nobles looked thoughtful, uneasy. They had seen the way Anara carried herself, the way she did not bend. Perhaps this child was not shame but something else. Roland sat among them, silent as the arguments filled the chamber. His fists were clenched, his heart heavy. Every voice felt like a blade, cutting into him. When they finally turned to him, demanding his judgment, he rose slowly. "The child is mine," he said firmly. "And I will not turn against my own blood." The hall erupted with cries of anger, but Roland did not waver. His voice carried across the chamber with a strength that silenced them. For the first time, he openly defied their scorn. That night, he went to Anara's chamber. She was sitting near the window, the faint light of the moons falling across her face. When she saw him, she smiled gently, though her eyes carried both strength and weariness. "You know, do you not?" she asked. "Yes," Roland replied. "The whole palace knows." She placed a hand over her stomach, her fingers light as if holding something precious. "They see it as danger. I see it as hope." Roland stepped closer. "The court will not forgive this. They will not allow it to continue. They will try to take the child from you." Anara looked at him calmly. "Will you allow them?" His chest tightened at her words. He remembered the night in the garden, the calm way she had faced the laughter of the empire. Now she faced something greater, and still she did not break. "No," he said at last. "I will not." In the days that followed, the palace grew restless. Nobles argued in private rooms. Servants whispered in corners. Rumors spread beyond the capital to the outer systems. Some claimed the child was a monster. Others whispered it was a miracle. The empire, so proud and unshaken, now trembled at a life not yet born. Anara felt the weight of every stare, yet she walked calmly, as always. When the nobles mocked her, she did not respond. When they whispered behind her, she did not turn. She held her dignity close, protecting the life within her. At night, she and Roland often met in secret. They spoke of the future, though neither knew what path it would take. Roland confessed his fears, his struggle between loyalty to his house and the truth of his heart. Anara listened quietly, reminding him that strength was not only in armies but in choices. "You were raised to believe power is everything," she said one night. "But power fades. What remains is what you choose to protect." Her words settled in his heart, deeper than any command he had received from his father or the council. Weeks turned to months. The whispers spread far beyond the palace. On distant colonies, humans who had long been seen as weak began to hear of the child. To them, it was not a scandal but a sign. They told each other stories of a future where humans and aliens stood side by side, not as master and servant but as equals. The empire tried to silence the rumors, but the stars carried whispers faster than ships. No wall could hold them back. In hidden corners of the galaxy, small voices began to rise. "The child who will change everything has been conceived." Inside the palace, the tension grew. Some nobles plotted to act against Anara, while others watched carefully, unsure which side to take. The council prepared to meet again, their judgment heavy with anger. Roland knew the storm was coming. Yet each time he looked at Anara, he felt his resolve strengthen. She was not afraid, and her courage fed his own. The night before the council gathered, Roland stood once more in the garden where they had first spoken. He looked up at the stars, remembering her question, "Do you not think the stars laugh at such pride?" Now he wondered if the stars were not laughing but waiting. Waiting for the child who would rewrite them. The palace halls of the Zorian Empire had never been so divided. For generations, order and strength had been the pillars of the empire. But now, whispers filled every corner, whispers about the human bride and the child growing inside her. The nobles argued without end. Some demanded that the child be removed before it was born. Others believed it should be taken and studied, as if it were a tool. A few, the rare few, began to wonder if the child might be something greater than any of them understood. Through it all, Anara remained calm. She carried her child with quiet dignity, walking through the palace as though the eyes of the nobles did not matter. Her steps were steady, her gaze unbroken. Guards and servants alike felt a strange respect for her, though few spoke it aloud. Roland, however, felt the weight of storms gathering above them. He stood in the council chamber, his voice firm against the elders who demanded the end of the child. His words did not sway all, but his presence made it clear he would not bend. His defiance shocked many, for he had always been known as a loyal son of the empire. Now he was something else. At last, the day came when Anara gave birth. It was deep in the night, the palace quiet except for the cries of the newborn. The child, small and fragile, was wrapped in soft white cloth and placed in Anara's arms. She looked down at him, her eyes filled with wonder. "He is called Sorin," she whispered, choosing the name herself. Roland stood beside her, gazing at his son with silent awe. Sorin's eyes opened, and they were unlike any he had ever seen. They glowed faintly, a color not found in either human or Zorian kind. In those eyes was a depth that felt older than the stars, a quiet strength that unsettled even Roland. From the moment Sorin was born, the palace was shaken. Healers examined him, searching for weakness, but found only strange strength. His heartbeat was steady yet different, carrying a rhythm none could explain. His small hands clutched tightly, his gaze followed movements with unusual focus. Even as a newborn, there was something about him that felt beyond ordinary. The council reacted with outrage when they heard of his birth. "This child must not be allowed to live," one elder cried. "He is a threat to the order of the empire." "He is not natural," another declared. "No union between human and noble blood should ever exist." But others, though fewer in number, began to hesitate. "Perhaps," one said quietly, "the child is a sign of something greater. Perhaps the stars themselves have allowed this." The arguments grew fiercer. Rumors spread beyond the palace walls, across cities, and into the far colonies. On distant human settlements, people whispered of Sorin with hope. To them, he was not a mistake but a promise. A child who carried the blood of two worlds could be a bridge between them. Yet danger grew closer. Plans were made in secret chambers. Some nobles spoke of sending assassins. Others pressed Roland's father, demanding he give the order to remove the child. Roland knew they would not stop. He looked at Anara, who cradled Sorin with calm strength, and he knew he had to choose. He could no longer remain within the walls of the palace. One night, he came to her chamber with urgency in his eyes. "We cannot stay," he said. "They will come for him. They will not rest until they have taken him from us." Anara held Sorin closer. "Where will we go?" "To the outer systems," Roland answered. "There are forgotten colonies, places where the empire's reach is weak. We will hide among them until Sorin is strong enough to choose his own path." Anara nodded without fear. She had known this moment would come. She had seen the way the nobles looked at her child. She had heard their whispers. Yet she did not tremble. She looked down at Sorin, and her voice was steady. "Then we go where the stars lead." That very night, Roland prepared a small vessel. Loyal guards who believed in him stood watch, ready to cover their escape. Anara moved quickly, carrying Soren close against her heart. The halls of the palace were dangerous, but her steps did not falter. When they reached the ship, the engines roared to life, and the vessel lifted into the night sky. The palace lights faded behind them as stars spread wide before their eyes. For the first time, Soren looked up at the stars from the window of the vessel. His small eyes seemed to glow brighter as he gazed at the endless sky. Anara held him tightly, whispering soft words only he could hear. Roland stood at the controls, guiding the ship away from the Empire's heart. His jaw was set, but inside he felt the weight of a new truth. He was no longer just a noble of the Zorian Empire. He was a father, a protector, and his path now belonged to something greater than power. Behind them, the Empire seethed with anger. Councils were called, fleets were prepared, and orders were given to hunt the runaway prince, his human bride, and their impossible child. But for now, in the quiet of space, they were free. Anara sat near the window, watching Soren's eyes reflect the starlight. She whispered gently, "You are not a mistake. You are the beginning." Roland glanced at her, his voice low but certain. "He is the child they fear. The child who should not exist. And because of that, he is the one who will change everything." The ship moved deeper into the unknown, carrying with it 3 lives bound by destiny. The stars stretched before them, endless and waiting. The ship drifted through the endless black of space, leaving the Zorian capital far behind. For days, Roland guided the vessel along secret paths he had learned as a soldier. He avoided patrol routes, jumped through unstable gates, and crossed regions where few dared to travel. Each moment was heavy with risk, but he never faltered. At his side, Anara cared for the child, her calm voice soothing both Soren and Roland when silence grew too heavy. They passed into the edge of the Empire, a region where the light of the Council no longer reached. Here, abandoned colonies floated among broken moons, and forgotten stations clung to survival in the shadows of old wars. The Empire had no interest in these places, for they held no wealth, no glory, only memories of failure. Yet for Roland and Anara, it was the perfect refuge. Their ship landed on a worn-out colony built into the side of a rocky world. The settlement was small, its buildings made of scrap metal and old stone. Smoke rose from chimneys, and lights flickered weakly in the dark. People walked with tired faces, their clothes patched many times over. Yet in their eyes was a quiet resilience. They were survivors, the kind the Empire had forgotten but never destroyed. When the settlers saw Roland's armor, they grew tense, expecting another hand of the Empire. But when they saw Anara carrying Soren, wrapped in a plain cloth, their suspicion softened. These people knew hardship, and they recognized it in the quiet strength of a mother. An elder of the colony approached. His name was Darren, his back bent with age, his eyes sharp with memory. He looked at Roland with caution and at Anara with quiet respect. "You are not here as rulers," he said slowly. "Why have you come?" Roland spoke firmly. "We seek no throne, no power. We only seek a place to live, away from the eyes of the Empire." The elder studied him for a long time. Then his gaze shifted to Soren, whose small eyes glowed faintly even in the dim light. He frowned but said nothing of it. At last, he nodded. "If you come in peace, then you may stay. But know this, outsider here, survival is not given. It is earned." So Roland, Anara, and Soren became part of the colony. Life there was not easy. Food was scarce, water had to be drawn from deep wells, and every family worked together to keep the machines running. Roland used his strength to help build defenses and repair broken structures. Though the people did not trust him at first, they soon saw that he carried no pride of nobility here. He labored beside them, lifting heavy beams, carrying stone, and protecting the workers from raiders who sometimes attacked the outskirts. Anara worked among the healers, learning how they treated wounds with herbs and simple tools. She shared stories of earth, teaching children songs of rivers and forests they had never seen. Her calm presence brought comfort to the weary, and soon even the suspicious settlers looked to her with respect. And Soren grew. From his earliest days in the colony, it was clear he was not like other children. He learned to walk sooner than expected, his small steps steady and strong. His eyes always seemed to notice more than others, as if he saw beyond the surface of things. When people spoke, he sometimes answered their thoughts before they voiced them. At first, this startled those around him, but soon they grew used to the strange gift. By the time he could speak clearly, Soren was already asking questions about the stars. He would sit with the old maps of the settlers, pointing to regions no one had traveled in years, and ask why they had been forgotten. He listened to stories of war and exile, not with fear but with quiet determination, as though building a vision in his mind. The settlers began to whisper about him. Some said he was touched by the stars. Others feared that his unusual gifts would draw danger. Yet even those who feared him could not deny that Soren carried a light unlike any they had seen before. Roland watched his son with both pride and unease. He had always believed strength came from armies and weapons, but Soren showed strength in other ways. The boy united children of the colony in games, calmed arguments among workers, and asked questions that even the elders struggled to answer. Roland could not explain it, but he knew this was no ordinary child. One evening, as the sun set red against the rocky horizon, Roland and Anara stood watching Soren play with other children. The boy was showing them how to build small shapes from stones, arranging them into patterns that looked like star maps. Roland spoke quietly. He grows too fast. He sees too much. The Empire will hear of him one day. They will not stop searching. Anara's gaze remained on her son. Then we must give him the strength to stand when that day comes. Not the strength of soldiers, but the strength to carry more than himself. Her words stayed with Roland. He had once thought his duty was only to protect with his blade. Now he began to see that true protection lay not in weapons but in preparing Soren for the destiny already forming around him. Years passed in exile. Soren grew into a young boy with bright eyes and a sharp mind. He worked beside the settlers, repairing machines, planting crops, and studying the stars. He asked questions about justice, about freedom, about why some lived in shadows while others ruled from thrones. He listened to every answer, but he was never satisfied, always seeking more. The settlers began to look to him, not as a child but as a voice. When disputes arose, Soren's calm words often settled them. When raiders threatened, his presence gave courage even before Roland drew his blade. And far beyond the forgotten colony, whispers continued to spread. Travelers carried stories of a boy born of two worlds, a child with eyes like the stars. Some called him hope, others called him danger. But all agreed on one thing. If he lived, the Empire would never remain the same. One night, as Soren stood outside the settlement, gazing up at the endless sky, he whispered words that only his parents heard. One day, I will not only look at the stars. I will change them. Roland felt a chill, but Anara placed a hand on her son's shoulder with quiet pride. Years passed quietly among the forgotten colonies. Soren had grown into a young boy, full of curiosity, intelligence, and a presence that drew attention wherever he went. The settlers had come to trust him, not only for his cleverness but for the way he inspired courage. He learned quickly from both Roland and Anara, blending the wisdom of two worlds into a perspective few could understand. Soren's unique abilities continued to develop. He could sense feelings, understand intentions before they were spoken, and find solutions to problems that adults had struggled with for years. The settlers began to see him not only as a child of the human and Zorian worlds but as a symbol of hope for something greater than themselves. Roland watched his son with pride and worry. He knew the Empire would not allow Soren to remain hidden forever. One morning, as he and Soren repaired a broken energy collector, he spoke quietly. The Empire will come for you one day, Roland said. They see you as a threat because you are different. You carry the blood of two worlds, and that frightens them. Sauron looked up, calm and thoughtful. I am ready, father. I have learned from you, from mother, and from everyone here. When they come, I will not hide. Roland's chest tightened. He had prepared for battles, for hiding, for survival. Yet he had not prepared for the courage Sauron already carried. Months later, the inevitable arrived. Scout ships of the Zorian Empire appeared near the colony, their silver hulls shining under the light of the twin suns. The settlers panicked at first, fearing attack, yet Sauron remained calm. He gathered the people in the central plaza and spoke with a voice that carried the weight of his understanding. You do not need to fight, he said. We will not run. We will meet them with truth, not fear. The Empire may see us as weak, but we are strong in ways they cannot yet understand. The Zorian ships landed, and armored soldiers stepped onto the rocky ground. Their leader approached, a commander loyal to the Empire, his face cold with duty. He demanded the child be surrendered immediately. Roland stepped forward, his armor polished and imposing, but he did not draw a weapon. His hand rested gently on Sauron's shoulder. You will not take him, Roland said firmly. He is under our protection. The commander's eyes narrowed. The child is not yours to protect. He is a threat to the Empire. He must be brought to the council immediately. Sauron stepped forward, standing taller than most soldiers expected a young boy to. His gaze swept across the assembled troops and settlers. Then he spoke, his voice calm but unwavering. I am not a threat. I am not a weapon. I am the child of two worlds, and I carry their hopes, not their hatred. You may see me as dangerous, but the true danger lies in fear, in refusing to understand what is possible. The soldiers hesitated. They had been trained to obey orders without question, yet there was something in Sauron's words that unsettled them. Even the commander felt the weight of truth pressing against the rules he had followed for years. Sauron continued. Look around you. These people do not fight for power or glory. They work together. They survive because they trust each other. That is strength. Not your weapons, not your laws, not your empire. Strength is in the heart. The words spread through the plaza, touching the settlers, the soldiers, and even Roland. It was as if the air itself held its breath. Some soldiers lowered their weapons, unsure how to respond. The commander's hand trembled slightly, but he did not speak. Sauron turned to Roland and Anara, who stood behind him. This is our choice, he said. We can fight and continue the cycle of fear, or we can show the Empire that strength is not always in control, but in understanding. We must choose wisely. Roland felt pride and relief at the wisdom of his son. He knew that, for the first time, the future of humans and Zorians alike could be changed without violence. He nodded to Sauron, his heart steady. Anara stepped forward and addressed the commander directly. The boy speaks truth. We do not seek war. We do not seek vengeance. We only seek life and freedom. If you open your mind, you may understand what he carries. The commander's eyes narrowed, but he hesitated. He had trained to see humans as weak and insignificant, and Zorians as superior. Yet standing before him was a child who carried both, a child whose words unsettled every belief he had ever held. Sauron raised his small hand, not in threat but in invitation. The stars are wide and endless. They belong to no one. The future is not written by fear but by choice. Choose with us, and you may see it change. Slowly, some soldiers lowered their weapons. Others whispered among themselves. Even the commander felt a shift within him, a realization that obedience alone could not define the future. The settlers watched in quiet awe as the Empire's soldiers began to see not enemies, but possibilities. Sauron's words had reached them, showing that even the mightiest empire could be questioned without war. Roland placed a hand on Saren's shoulder. You have shown more strength today than any army could. The choice you offer may save not only us, but many beyond this world. Saren nodded, his eyes reflecting the twin suns above. I will not force anyone. I only show them another way. The Empire may fear it now, but one day, they will see that fear is not power. The commander stepped back, unsure how to respond. He glanced at his soldiers, most of whom had lowered their weapons completely. Finally, he spoke, his voice quieter than before. Perhaps, there is more to this child than we understood. Perhaps, this is the way forward. Roland exhaled slowly, relief and hope filling his chest. Anara smiled at Saren, proud of his courage and wisdom. The settlers began to celebrate quietly, not in victory over an enemy, but in recognition of understanding. For the first time, the colony felt safe, not because of walls or weapons, but because of the courage and wisdom of a child who had been born of two worlds. Saren looked up at the stars once again, his heart steady. He knew the Empire would continue to test them, but he also knew that his voice, his understanding, and his courage could inspire change. He had shown that strength could exist without war, that choice could exist without fear, and that the future of the stars might belong to those brave enough to see it differently. Years passed, and the forgotten colony grew stronger under the quiet guidance of Roland, Anara, and Saren. The boy had grown into a young man, his presence both calm and commanding. People who had once doubted the strength of humans or Zorians alike now looked to him for guidance. He was not a ruler in the traditional sense, yet his words carried more weight than any throne or decree. Saren spent hours studying the stars, learning their patterns, their movements, and their hidden connections. He mapped the skies, discovering paths between worlds that were unknown to most of the Empire. He shared this knowledge with the settlers, teaching them navigation, survival, and cooperation. Every lesson he gave was infused with understanding, patience, and a vision of a future that had never been imagined. Roland watched his son with pride. The boy who had once been called a child who should not exist had grown into someone who inspired hope. And yet, danger still lingered beyond the colony. The Zorian Empire, though shaken by Saren's earlier wisdom, continued to expand its fleets and patrols, seeking to reclaim control over the people it considered beneath its rule. One evening, as the twin suns dipped behind the rocky horizon, a fleet appeared on the edge of the colony's atmosphere. Sleek ships glimmered under the fading light, their purpose clear. The settlers panicked, but Saren remained calm. He stepped onto the plateau overlooking the landing site, his figure strong and confident, and raised a hand to signal quiet. The lead ship opened its hatch, and the same commander from years before stepped forward. His armor was worn, his expression tense, but there was a difference now. He did not command soldiers to attack. Instead, he approached with caution, studying the young man who had grown far beyond anyone's expectations. "Child of two worlds," the commander said, his voice hesitant. "The Empire has come to claim what it believes is rightfully theirs. Surrender yourself, and no harm will come to your people." Saren looked at the fleet, then at the settlers behind him. His gaze swept across the commander, steady and unafraid. "I am not a possession," he said. "I am not a tool. I am a son, a student, and a member of this community. The Empire believes it can claim the future, but the future is not theirs alone. It belongs to those willing to see beyond fear." The commander hesitated, struck by the calm power in Saren's voice. He had faced thousands of soldiers, ruled planets, and enforced laws without question. Yet here was a young man who had neither army nor title, yet held more authority in a single word than any council or weapon could command. Roland stepped forward beside his son. "We do not seek war, but we will defend ourselves if forced. This community has survived long because we work together. We will not be broken by fear or threats." Anara moved to Saren's other side. "You may believe strength comes from force, but it comes from understanding. Look at your soldiers. Are they strong because of fear, or because they trust in what is right? The commander lowered his head slightly, recognizing the truth in her words. His soldiers shifted uneasily. Some whispered among themselves, recalling the peace that had settled over the colony when Sauron first spoke to the patrol years ago. Sauron raised both hands, his eyes reflecting the stars above. The Empire can take many things by force, but it cannot take the courage to see another way. The choice is yours. You may continue the cycle of fear and war, or you may join us in building a future where humans and Zorians can live not as masters and subjects, but as equals. The words hung in the air, strong and clear. Soldiers looked at each other, unsettled by the absence of orders and the presence of truth. The commander, once rigid with duty, found himself questioning the path he had followed for so long. At last, he spoke, his voice softer but resolute. You speak wisdom. The Empire has ruled through fear, and yet here is a community that thrives without it. I will consider your words. Return to your home, and may your guidance be heard beyond this world. Sauron lowered his hands, his eyes calm. He had not demanded obedience. He had offered understanding. The fleet remained, but the tension dissolved, replaced by cautious hope. In the following weeks, envoys came from other colonies and human settlements, inspired by stories of Sauron's courage and wisdom. They brought messages of peace, offers of cooperation, and invitations to share knowledge. Slowly, the influence of the forgotten colony began to spread across the galaxy, not by force, but by example. Sauron continued his work with the settlers, teaching, learning, and exploring. He guided young minds, prepared new leaders, and charted the stars, always mindful of the lessons he had learned from both his mother and father. The boy who had once been a child no one expected had grown into a young man who reshaped the destiny of many worlds. Roland often watched his son at night, gazing at the same stars that had guided him years ago. He remembered the first forbidden night in the palace garden when he had met Anara, and he realized that the journey had been more than survival. It had been preparation for something greater than any title or law. Anara stood beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder. Look at him, she said softly. He has done what no empire could force. He has shown that hope, courage, and understanding can change the hearts of many. Roland nodded. And he has done it without violence. Without forcing anyone. That is the true strength of our child. Sauron, unaware of his parents' conversation, studied the night sky, tracing the paths of distant worlds. He whispered softly, words meant for no one but himself. I will not only follow the stars. I will guide them. I will show that a child born of two worlds can bring peace, hope, and change that no empire can undo. And so it was. The child who had once been called impossible became a beacon for all. He united humans and Zorians, taught that strength could exist without war, and showed that the future belonged not to those who ruled by fear, but to those who led with wisdom, courage, and understanding. The galaxy watched as Sauron's influence spread. Colonies rebuilt, settlements flourished, and even the empire began to change, slowly learning that their old ways were not the only ways. The stars, endless and wide, held new paths now, paths that carried hope rather than fear. In time, Sauron's story became legend, told among humans and Zorians alike. It was the story of a child born in a palace meant for laughter, who survived exile, faced empires, and chose wisdom over violence. He rewrote not only the destiny of his people but also the meaning of strength itself.